Rwanda, 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 Rwanda. I mean, we're as bad as anyone else, but it is absolutely extraordinary how much that policy has become this sort of flagship key policy. This is like the be-all and end-all of government, bandwidths, and stop the boats. But one thing that we were just saying earlier, it unites left and right in this country, whether it's, the far left, whether it's, the left wing of the Tory party. Everybody agrees this policy is not going to make a blind bit of difference to the actual number of people arriving here as channel migrants. We're going to talk to the former Home Secretary, Suella Braverman, who does agree on that point after midday, so do stay tuned for that. But what is the point of this bill?
It's interesting because, as you say, this was supposed to be the flagship policy, the flagship immigration policy, but also very important for Rishi Sunak. And yet it's kind of become the Tory party's sort of epitaph, its final nail in the coffin, to mix my metaphors. There's a kind of... They've spent 2 years coming up with a policy which has succeeded in making them look, to a certain section of the population, like they're mean and they don't care about migrants. At the same time, it was failed to actually deal with the problem. They've also failed to even implement it, so it's made them look impotent and inept at the same time. So I think it's a perfect encapsulation, really, of this Tory administration, which is they've managed to upset a lot of people, to underserve the people who do support them, and for it all to just crumble into nothing at the end. So it's ridiculous and it's absurd and it's gone on for way too long. No one believes it's going to work. And cost a fortune.
Yeah, and it's almost...
But this is them summed up, isn't it?
Yeah, well, exactly. Hey, welcome to government. We spoke to Ben Habib, the Deputy Editor of Reform UK, a little bit earlier, and he was basically saying, I mean, we just put it out, so if you just missed it, we just put it out on social media. Do you take a look? Because I think it was an extraordinary conversation. Basically, saying, we need to turn the boats back. And I said, OK, so... And everyone's been talking about that. It was like pushing the boats back. They're on dinghies, OK? We know what the people smugglers do. They actually often just only give them enough, fuel to get them only a certain way. Get halfway across the channel, and then you'll be rescued, don't worry. He's basically saying, we shouldn't rescue them when they just leave them there, turn them back, and just basically using border force, using force, turn them back. I pointed out these boats that you can't actually, if you start towing these boats back, people will just jump into the water. What do you do then? You're going to have to rescue those people, and then what do you do with them? He says, we don't have to rescue them. I mean, you do. The Royal Navy, Border Force stuff, are not going to not rescue these people. The Royal National Lifeboat Institute will be out there rescuing these people, and quite rightly. You can be as opposed to channel migrants getting on these boats and they're not desperate when they're leaving France, as anyone is, and certainly I'm opposed to. I don't want a single one of these people. But I wouldn't leave them to die because I'm a civilised human being. And none of the people involved in this would do that. But he was saying, literally, you could give them another boat, you could throw them a life jacket, but you don't have to pick them up. Is that remotely tenable?
Not at all. And it sounded like he hadn't really thought it through either, which is unforgivable if you're going on television to discuss.
Has any party got a thought-through Rwanda policy? The channel migrant policy?
I lost track of the number of dinghies he was suggesting might be at hand, and then maybe there'd be another boat that could be offered to them. But ultimately, it did come down to that point of, they've made their bed.
He said, we mustn't infantilise people. They've made a choice.
But there are all kinds of situations in which someone has broken the law or done something that we don't wish to. It doesn't mean you don't extend anything that you can to try and save them from imminent peril. Those two things don't marry up to me. And I think it's just a problem on the right of British politics is that they've been trying to find a solution to this particular problem. But it's often just become a competition of who can sound the hardest on it, rather than actually thinking about what is effective, yes, but also what is humane. No one is going... the vast majority of the British public want that border to be controlled.
They also don't want people to die. Well, we had five migrants died overnight during an attempt to cross the Channel. The French Coast Guard have announced this morning, including a 4-year-old girl. I mean, again, the parents who put a 4-year-old girl into a rickety dinghy, I mean, appalling. I don't want anyone to die in these circumstances, certainly not children who are victims of this even more. But the Home Secretary, James Cleverly, has issued a statement saying these tragedies have to stop. I will not accept a status quo which costs so many lives. This government is doing everything we can to end this trade, stop the boats and ultimately break the business model of the evil people smuggling gangs so they no longer put lives at risk. But actually, as a guest pointed out earlier, so we've got, and if you are watching on the telly box, we do have some pictures live from Dover right now. But, I mean... and none of the things they're planning to do are going to deal with this. We've got Labour basically saying, basically, we'll talk to Emmanuel Macron and Brussels and they'll help us sort it. Well, those countries in Europe are already facing their own crisis. They've already got a dispute and they've managed to get it over the line, but with lots of disagreement from some of the other countries refusing to sort of accept their, quote, fair share of migrants because they're all arriving on the southern borders. And, basically those countries saying, It's not, why are we having to deal with this? But the open borders allow people to go through. The reality is that these people are not going to stop coming, and the people's traffickers are not going to end this. They're making £1 million a week. They're not walking away from this anytime soon. And I think, as Ben Habib pointed out, this is a policy which, the Rwanda policy certainly, it's only single men arriving, single men. They'll all be married, bringing children. They are literally going to be buying children and having, forced marriages to bring someone so that they can't be deported. This is how this market works.
And there is, I think, fundamental naivety about the fact that if you change the laws, but there's still loopholes, people will get around them. Yeah. And I think it's incumbent on any government that wants to take this seriously. Like, yes, you have to do this in a way which is humane, which allows for the number of people who can legitimately claim asylum to do so via routes, ideally without them having to get on a dinghy and cross the English Channel. All of that should be provided for, but at the same time, it should be obvious to almost anyone that the status quo cannot be allowed to continue. If for no other reason, then the humanitarian catastrophe, which could easily take place.
But even this whole safe and legal routes, these people, there's lots of economic migrants, they're unlikely to be the people who were chosen to get approved under those safe and legal routes. So there's still going to be a market. And anyway, even with the safe and legal routes, at some point you're going to have a number that cuts off. Like, say, well, that's as many as we'll take. And whenever I put that question to the bleeding hearts on the left, they won't give me a number. And that number would be in the millions. If you're saying that everybody who is facing, persecution or potential persecution abroad, every woman in Afghanistan, every Christian in the Middle East, I mean, it's absurd. I mean, every gay person in many African nations, and Asian nations. I'm sorry, the idea that we'll just take them all in. It's absurd. You'd have to have a cap. And what is that cap? Is it 10,000? Is it 100,000? Is it 1 million? Is it 10 million? What is that cap?
Well, I think that's the point I would make is that even if you want a generous refugee policy. And I think the Ukraine example is a good example of how when people feel that it's controlled, when people see the need for it, and when it isn't a kind of free-for-all, the British public can be incredibly generous.
Women and children.
There's the women and children aspect as well, of course. But at the same time, if you are concerned about making sure that we're giving sort of safe haven to as many deserving people as possible, then you shouldn't want the status quo either, where you've got basically refugee pathway being used as a means of illegal economic migration. That's obviously untenable. It completely depletes public trust in the system and support for the system. And it will lead to people wanting to clamp down and to be less and less generous because they intuit, rightly, that the system is out of control. So it needs to be brought under control if you want it to be generous and sensible. And I think that's something that's been missed on a lot of people on the pro-refugee
in all the posh dinner parties that these MPs and peers and lawyers go to, but they're all the same, honestly.